Hello, I'm Doran Ellen Beldotan in Sfat, Israel, and I've got a cold. Excuse me. When I look at photos of Jeffrey Epstein, I keep getting a flash of a young boy playing ball back in Brooklyn. I know for sure I didn't know him well, but somehow he looks very familiar to me. I don't know whether I saw him once or he was a friend of a friend, or maybe he just reminds me of someone else, but he looks very familiar to me. And because he looks familiar to me and I can see this flash of him as a young boy playing ball in Brooklyn, he looks less monstrous to me now. I can see his humanity. And I also see the tragedy of how he got to where he got to. And the reason why he got there is because, brilliant as he is, he doesn't know how to use his mind. Truth to tell, in this generation, very few Jews do know how to use their minds. There are teachings in Judaism that teach us how to do that, but those teachings are misunderstood and they're not emphasized in our generation. And most Jews don't know how to use their minds correctly, and they get into all kinds of trouble because if you're intelligent and you don't know how to use consciousness, you are invariably going to find yourself in a very complicated, intricate, very detailed and very compelling world of illusion. That's what happens when intelligent people don't use their minds correctly. The world of illusion that they create is simply more complicated than that of others, but no less delusional. Person that I can think of who I would say is a master of using the mind correctly is Thich Nhat Hanh. And I don't care what you do or don't believe in, listening to him is worthwhile. I don't do meditation. I find that the techniques of Jewish meditation have always seemed kind of artificial to me, and it feels uncomfortable and funny doing it. The way I learn takes me into different states of consciousness. But of course the Buddhists do use meditation, but I think that he uses meditation a little bit differently than others do. I like his mindfulness, and he's very, very good at knowing how the mind works. I think it's very strange that people don't think that they need to develop the ability to use their consciousness. They think that it just flows naturally, and they don't develop it. They may learn, they may develop knowledge in a certain area, expertise in a certain area, but they don't really develop their ability to use their consciousness, not thinking that they need to, which is kind of a strange idea, because if you want to get physically stronger, you have to work at it. Why do people think that they just know? Or if you want to learn to play an instrument, for instance, you have to get continually more dexterous. So I don't understand why people think that they just know how to use their consciousness at the age of 50 the way they used it when they were 5 months old. That's a mistake. Every person that I have ever known who has gone in the wrong direction, when questioned about why they do what they do, gives the same answer. That's just the way things are. I'm doing what I have to do in order to survive. If I don't do it, somebody else will. In other words, they are in completely reactive mode, not in proactive mode. Their idea of being proactive is trying to impose their will on others, but they are not proactive insofar as using their consciousness is concerned. They're completely in passive mode. I look at politicians, I look at monarchs, I look at people in all kinds of positions of power and influence, generals. They all make the same mistake. They are in completely reactive mode. They all think that they're just doing what they have to do in order to survive. If I were to ask you, what do you think the expression describe reality means? If you're like most people, your answer is going to be, well, it's observing what's going on in the world to the best of my ability, being a keen observer of that which is going on, and reporting on it accurately. That's a mistake. Describing reality means exactly that. We describe reality. Now, this happens so fast that most people have never had the experience of stepping out of the flow of consciousness and being able to observe it from the outside. Most people have never had the experience of experiencing what they call the nothing, that which is not. If you've ever had that experience, it isn't even nothing. When you're in that experience, you don't even know you're in it until you come out of it, and then looking back at it, it seems to you like you were nowhere, nothing happened, like there was, like you were watching a film of your life, and then the film broke, and then it started again, and there was nothing there in between. But invariably, even though it seems to us like it was nothing, so much information comes in that it takes you years and years and decades to process all of what happened in that time in which we were in what's called in Hebrew ha'ayin. Nothing doesn't even describe it. It's not even nothing. It's God in and of itself, and there's nothing that the mind can wrap itself around. When we make a statement about reality that we think is a description of that which exists in and of itself and a priori, we are actually giving the creation a directive. If we are utterly convinced of this truth, and it's one of our maxims that we proceed from on a regular basis, and in and of itself, holding a maxim in the mind, which is one of your basic tenets of reality that you stick to and you remind yourself of, and you repeat it again and again. This is a form of meditation. This is actually psychic driving. There is nothing out there. Nothing. Everything that we experience is the result of the directives and the expectations that we have, and the creation mirrors that back to us so fast that we think that it was there when we looked at it and we're observing it. But in fact, it is a reaction to our minds. Everyone who has a job, a career that they have cultivated that makes tremendous demands on them does not know how to use their mind. Wise people do not go into professions that are going to make tremendous demands on them. They want to have their minds as free as possible. Even if that means living on a meager salary, it is worthwhile being free to have your mind at your command while you're working. If you have any kind of a job that totally sucks you in, you have become lost in the flow of your own consciousness, and you are in a state of it's like being in a river that's flowing out of control. And all of the powerful people, all of them, without exception, are in that case. They are in a river that they're simply being carried away with. And in their mind, they think that all that they can do is try to survive the onslaught of all kinds of dangers and terrors and eventualities and so forth and so on. When Jews go into that state of mind, it is particularly disastrous. I am absolutely convinced that the Rothschild family went into financing because they thought that that is the only way to be able to protect themselves from the dangerous Gentile world. I am absolutely sure. Never realizing that the very fact that they were utterly convinced that all of the Gentiles are dangerous and the world in which they're living in is dangerous because of the Gentiles brings that into existence for them. And then once you get into that, the demands become greater and greater and generate themselves. And then you can't get out of it anymore. I've heard Soros speaking in the same way. I've heard David Rockefeller speaking in the same way. They are all utterly convinced that they are simply doing what they have in order not to be eaten by sharks. All of them. And that's their own minds. I look at the British monarchy and I see all of the obligations that they have to fulfill. They have to, be there and the pomp and circumstance, and they have to dress this way, and they have to do this, completely unaware that they are doing that to themselves. None of that is real. The younger people, I understand, are starting to balk. They don't want to be so involved in all of the pomp and circumstances, and the younger women in the family find all sorts of excuses, you know, not to show up and be there at every single event, and they're starting to catch on, because it becomes overwhelming. I have to do this, I have to do that, I must do this, I must do that. State of Israel was the worst thing that ever happened to the Jews. By far it's worse than the diaspora. Why? If one thinks that they need a state, if you are convinced that your safety depends upon your having a state, it means, well, that means that we have to have a court system, and we have to have an army, and we have to have spies, and we have to have satellites, and we have to have cyber, you know, and they got totally caught in the web of their own terrors. All of them. I look at Netanyahu, he looks to me like, I don't know the English word for miskein. He looks to me like a poor miserable, right, thank you. Poor miserable little character to me. He has no control over his mind whatsoever, and therefore he has no control over his life whatsoever. He's always doing what he thinks he has to be doing. I have to be doing this, and I have to be doing that, and I have to be doing it faster than all of the other people that are living the same delusion that I'm still living, that you know. No, that's not the way to live. That's not the way to approach reality. The approach to reality has to be the realization that any supposition that we have upon which we act is actually a directive to the creation to dish up what it is that you're expecting. Once you get that, once you really get the understanding that there is nothing out there at all except that which you will to be there, you start to get control of your life. Now, it doesn't happen that from one day to the next, upon realizing that you go from being a total mess to having it all together and everything is under your control. It doesn't work that way. The mind has to become actuated to a different way of thinking, and that's a process. Also, even when we gain control over our minds, not only do we still have some of the residue from when we didn't that we have to work out and kind of burn off, we're living in a world in which most people don't have that control. And if we have any compassion in ourselves, we don't remove ourselves from being able to help them, because for them their delusions are very real, and they're really suffering. So it's not like you find total peace once you understand this. You still hurt for others, and you still have some of your own stuff to work out. But you do get to a higher level of being able to control things. My best advice to people is to pare down and simplify your life as much as possible. To slow the flow down. so that there isn't too much chaotic stuff happening, so that you don't have too many obligations. That might mean moving out of the city. That might mean reducing the number of people that we socialize with. Many of us have a lot of unnecessary clutter and obligation in our lives. Pare that stuff down. And if at all possible, even if it means taking a pay cut, try to find a job that allows you to be able to think while you're doing it. I never ever had a job that demanded all of my faculties be on board and that didn't allow me to sit back and stop and think and observe and control the flow. Even if that meant making a lot less money. Even if that meant having a job that's considered a lot less prestigious. All prestigious jobs, all of them, are going to require that you be totally into it, totally involved in it, that your mind is no longer your own, your behavior is no longer your own, your decisions are all for the sake of the job, and so forth and so on. Those are really dangerous careers if you're trying to get control over the chaos. And ultimately, no amount of money is worth that. We are witnessing people who have taken the road of trying to control the world without controlling their minds. We're seeing everything turn into utter chaos for them. It's all breaking up for them. The best approach to the world is to understand that what we believe is what's going to happen. If you believe in Armageddon, if you believe that the only way that you can make a living is by living in a capitalist society, if you believe that if you don't carry out ceremonies exactly as God describes, that you're going to be punished for that, that's going to be your reality. If you really are convinced, I've said this in other videos and it bears repeating. There are two verbs that are very closely connected in Hebrew. One is shachen, which means where we dwell, wherein we live. And the other is shachnea, shin kaf nun ayin, which is to be convinced of something. It is the same root as shachen with another ayin, and the letter ayin speaks of depth, omek, depth. What we are convinced of is where we live. We have to be able to objectify our thoughts, our suppositions, the thoughts that come automatically, the attitudes that come automatically, the beliefs that we believe automatically, to be able to rise above them and observe them. Thich Nhat Hanh is very, very good at talking about this and explaining how this works, where a person has to get to a level where they look at their mind from above, and rather than getting engaged emotionally in it, rather than feeling I have to act on this immediately, I've got to do, just to be able to look at it and say, that's an interesting thought. We have to be able to observe the observer, to be looking at the seeing, to be considering the considerations. We have to be able to objectify our personalities and our mental constructions to the point where we can look at them and say, that's not a helpful thought, or that is a helpful thought, or that's an interesting thought, that is a creative thought. I like that thought. I think I'm going to keep that thought as part of the personality, integrated in. Make it a choice. This is a practice that it takes a while to get it. But once we do get it, once we don't jump with emotional reaction and with action on every impulse, on every thought that arises in the mind and every emotion that arises in the heart, we begin to be able to do what is called describing reality more correctly. Thank you for listening.